Hi, everyone. So excited to be back today with two of my favorite people, my some of my best LinkedIn connections and colleagues, and just terrific on live stream. So I'm building up, I'm raising the bar today, and I'm confident we'll come through. Chat's wide open. We depend on chat to be as relevant as possible, and always want to be a value add to everybody who participates and watches the show. So, with that said, Charles, because you're from Hong Kong, you can go first because your day started earlier than ours.
Okay, you're very kind, Don. Thank you very much, and thanks for having me back today. It was a great session yesterday with Beverly, and I'm looking forward to our hour today with Carl. And I think that it's a great opportunity to talk about planning and the importance of planning and all the dynamics of plans. As Winston Churchill said, plans are of little importance, but planning is essential. So I'll start with that and hand it over to you, Carl.
Sure. No, I totally agree with the statement. One of my people in my network quoted that same statement from Winston Churchill earlier this week. He works with veterans who are entrepreneurs, and so I felt compelled to comment that a great plan is really better if you communicate it effectively with your team as a second step because I agree that a plan typically is out of date as soon as you're done. But at the same time, if you've gone through the steps of properly planning, taking everything into consideration of where you're going, what you want to do, who's going to do it, then you're in a position to be agile enough to adjust your plan as needed to meet the market and responses to everything that you're doing. Uh, and I was kind of laughing at myself before this show because this was supposed to be my third LinkedIn Live show. But the show we had planned to do earlier this morning, apparently the planning wasn't as good as I thought it was. So we had to cancel that show and we're going to need to reschedule it. So the definition of plan varies immensely between an entrepreneur who thinks it's something you do that you paper up after you've already done it, to good planning, which sets the table for your actions going forward and communicated to your team so you get the benefit of working in harmony with all their skills and talents.
Well, that's a great liftoff. Appreciate it. It's always coming in, batting third. That is always the best position here because you get to leverage off of what's been said before. What comes to mind, especially in the spontaneous, responsive environment we have here today, is that statement: "Fail to plan, plan to fail." And again, there are no absolutes. Everything needs some context and relationship, but having a direction makes a difference. Having something that can support that direction makes a difference. And Mike Tyson said all your plans go out the window as soon as you get hit with your first punch, right? And now you have to deal with whatever you're dealing with. And I think being flexible, being aware, and also being inclusive to other people's opinions and thoughts relative to creating your plan and then modifying your plan. Because, again, of mice and men, there's a whole statement on that also. So, with that said, I'm fascinated, Charles, by your background. And at one point, you were more commercially entrepreneurial, would you say?
Yes.
And we'll take this as a as a interrogation. So what starting out in Toronto, moving into, I guess, business, you might say. What how did you gravitate to education in Hong Kong? I think that's an interesting topic.
Sure. Well, I'll give you the real quick headlines on my career. I started my first business when I was 16. And it was just like roll up our sleeves. It was like, painting houses, but we were cleaning boats in the Toronto Harbor, Great Lakes area. And that turned into a business that I ran for 14 years. It was seasonal. So I ran when I was in high school, I ran it during the summer. And then when I went into university, it became a little bit more year round. And that's I was studying business in university, so I used to say that my company was sort of my laboratory. I would learn concepts in business school, and then I would go practice them during the time when the business was open during the sailing season. And along that time is when I got really fascinated with a lot of concepts around the most interesting part of my degree, I thought, was organizational behavior, organizational dynamics. And that's when I got really interested in everything about time management, about planning, and everything related to that, and all the statistics around executives and leaders not spending enough planning and time, and that's contributes to all sorts of messes that they find themselves in because of a lack of planning. And I got to a point where I got involved in a couple of different consulting firms. One of them relocated me from Toronto to Vancouver. I hit a crossroads in my career several years later, and I went back to school, did a graduate program in Asia Pacific Management, and from there was recruited to work in Hong Kong. Predominantly, I worked in the tech industry and with Rockwell, Juniper, Citrix. And then I had a change in seasons where an opportunity came up in the education sector. I was very involved in youth group. I have 4 kids, including triplets. I'm in HR. I have headcount issues everywhere, including in my family. And I started working in education really to give back to society. I really believe that my ceiling is the next generation's floor. But all the way along, I've been in human resources, and I've had that fascination for leadership development, organizational behavior, organizational development has always stayed near and dear to my heart. So I'm always reading about the latest leadership styles, or what's the latest time management system, or how is AI impacting planning, or how is technology impacting planning, and testing out different tools and things like that. But I got into education really to make a difference for the next generation. And our vision at ESF is for every student to be the best that we can be. And lately, we've been really leading an inquiry to make sure that my HR team, which is about 30 people, feel that they are contributing to the overall organization and impacting teachers and educational assistants in the classroom so that students can be the best that they can be.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And what it does demonstrate is the ability to pivot, change, reinvent, and keep moving. There's a lot of people that go somewhere, stay somewhere, and become what they were there, which could be plus or minus. But it's interesting to move into different industries, different cultures, and have different intentions at different times in your life. So, Karl, uh, your story relative to planning, and I know you started out as an attorney. So, how did your life journey change with time?
So I'm going to one up Charles here. And I started my first business at the age of 7.
Oh,
Uh, I was attending a 3-room country schoolhouse, and that was very rural. And at the same time, my parents still had aspirations that I had some musical talent. So they were hauling me into town every weekend for music lessons. And they learned, unfortunately, that I have zero musical talent, maybe even a negative musical talent. But while waiting for them to pick me up after music lessons, I realized I could go up to the drugstore, I could buy candy at retail, and I could resell it at a markup at the local school. And that worked very well for a few months before some parents complained, and I was forced to close my first business. Um, so by the time I got to high school, working in the family business, which was a combination of farming, farm equipment, and automobiles, I took over the hay hauling portion of the business, where we would pick up hay bales in the field and put them in barns for ourselves and our neighbors, and ran a custom crew that on a good day would put 1,000 bales in a different place for storage to in between the seasonal rains and other things. Finding that I did not enjoy farming, I ran away from the farm to college, got 2 degrees, moved to Denver, Colorado. So I was definitely away from the farm and engaged in supporting businesses in starting and raising capital and doing anything else they needed to do as an attorney, and then moved into management of actual technology commercialization projects for the last 25 years. During that time, I continued to draw the short straw, have to raise the funding for the projects, develop my own approach to doing so, which makes up most of my work today. I haven't drafted business plans since Saturday. And I already this morning proposed to one of my clients a great need to take everything that they want to do and put it on a business plan. Because when you're doing something, particularly for the first time, you're introducing a new product or service into a market that doesn't know who you are, why you exist, or what your value proposition is. It's really helpful to have a plan to help guide everybody to work together. And yet, this is a constant struggle with entrepreneurs who have a plan in their head, but that isn't necessarily the same plan as their partner or everybody else on their team. To raise funding, you need to communicate to investors your plan, how you intend to make money to repay their money. And that's a lot of my work is communicating things that may not be on paper into something that can be transferred and communicated to others.
Okay, well, that sure covers a lot of ground. I hope everybody has more context now. What's interesting, Charles, is your focus on technology, and I know Karl is an avid, uh, interested party in things like AI. Had launched his avatar this week. So, how do you see technology fitting into people's plans and future?
Well, I think pretty radically, and I'll start off by saying something about technology, which a lot of people forget, and that is, I think that technology gives us the opportunity to slow down. Even though it looks and feels as if technology is speeding everything up, and I think that the kind of automatic way of operating, people are speeding up, but actually the gift of technology is actually to create time and to create space for people to slow down, because you can get things done much more efficiently. But for sure, technology is going to have a massive impact on what's happening in business and happening in organizations and all over the planet. I met with some executives from LinkedIn today. We're planning an upcoming education event in Hong Kong for the education industry, and they were telling me such just some amazing insights that they've had about LinkedIn Learning. And that LinkedIn Learning, for example, is absolutely on fire in India and Philippines. And some of the largest consumers of LinkedIn Learning are actually in India and the Philippines, particularly in India. And it was something that they really did not expect at all, that the amount of LinkedIn Learning courses that are being consumed. And what's being consumed are courses about AI. And there's just a huge hunger to learn about AI and the impact of AI. And just to kind of give people an idea, for several years, I've actually used an AI scheduling assistant, which is quite funny. The assistant's named Evie. It's a machine, and it works alongside my email, and I can copy this tool in my email, and it looks and operates as if it's a human person. It's funny because I've got lots of stories of people who actually thought that Evie was real. But aside from that, I've been using Evie probably since 2016, and I have a paid subscription. It's not very expensive. It's like 10 US a month kind of thing. It's very inexpensive compared to the more expensive ones in the US. But over the weekend, I was reading an article about a new AI aggregator, and my team was joking today because I was sharing about this, the email aggregator, that this AI tool will go into your inbox and it will look, it might say, okay, let's say that the three of us had talked about planning this event, and we had 500 emails planning this event and other events on LinkedIn. And we had a planning session before our call today. Then the AI tool would go into the inbox, search for all the emails amongst the three of us, sort them, say, give you a summary of them, and then say, here's a summary, here's the last action step that you had with Dawn and Karl, and here's the next action step that you need to be talking about in your next session, your next meeting with them. And the power of that is just so powerful that it actually makes my existing AI assistant redundant. And my team started pretending that my EV AI was going to get laid off, and what would be that machine's emotional reaction to becoming redundant. But it really made me stop and think, wow, that a lot of people, when they learn that EV is actually a machine, they get quite mesmerized by it. But in reality, that I've been using that tool since 2016, 8 years, and now it's becoming redundant. And this is just happening all over the place. Another LinkedIn event I was at a couple of years ago. This is actually on my LinkedIn profile. A couple of posts ago, maybe 2 days ago, I shared some highlights of a survey that I did and some insights from a LinkedIn session I attended last month. And they were talking about how many skills in the workplace are going to be replaced. And it's about 70% of the required skills in the workplace will be replaced with new skills by 2030. Now that's only 6 years away. And that is radical change. And I mean, aggregating email, that's nothing. I've been seeing stories about people who've taken content and from nothing created a podcast in 5 minutes. It's just absolutely unreal how this is going to impact people. So you've got a lot of tools out there, like Notion, which helps you with planning. It helps you create vision boards and helps you to organize your thoughts. And they're really great, and they're powerful, and they aggregate data and they give reports. But the one thing is that neuroscience will tell you that nothing replaces taking a pen and writing something down on paper, because writing crystallizes thought and it extracts it. If you're looking at it online, you're still processing the images in your head, and it's not the same as the tactile feel of something on paper and writing things down. And in addition to the AI and the technology, you're also seeing more kind of paper planning tools that are emerging, where some of the advocates of these tools and the creators of these tools are saying, get yourself away from technology for a certain amount of time, an hour, a week sort of thing, and plan on paper, and then operate off that plan. And you can translate that into Notion if you want, or Google Sheets or whatever, but get it out of your head and still write it down. There's still power in that. So we're going to see that paradox playing out as we move forward.
Well, that's fascinating, and it's definitely information I wasn't aware of. So thank you for optimizing and updating myself, understanding that in 6 years I'm going to have to adjust to the 70% of talent that is no longer necessary. And
I have no doubt you'll do it, Don.
I'm going to try, especially with your help now. But what it really speaks to is being in an environment where it's like musical chairs with less chairs and faster music. So if you can grab a chair, you're going to be in a much better position. But if you used to just depend on a chair to always be there, you may be surprised. Karl, I know you're fascinated by AI and avatars, and are really leveraging a lot of opportunities. How does your vision coincide or complement what Charles has just said?
Well, I was reflecting on the fact that I still use a notepad and I write down stuff through the day. I have notes, comments to do things. And I was thinking I was just old school, couldn't do a good conversion. But now that Charles has confirmed it, I actually am ahead of the curve. I'm doing it correctly instead of doing it wrong by letting AI do everything. I feel a higher sense of serenity at this moment that will be shared with everyone throughout the day. But I've been working with AI for about 3 years with knowledge avatars with Emiliano De Laurentiis, who was my guest on my successful funding show yesterday. it's been a long, high, hard hill to climb to get it to a point where I would say the utilization of AI is giving some positive results that I feel always leave me ahead. I was actually experimenting as I was drafting my newsletter yesterday on topic of equipment financing as a source of funding. I decided for grins to interview my AI avatar, which I've trained up. And instead of me writing the article in my usual fashion, I just started asking the avatar questions I would ask if I were me working with a client. And it was a very good article. I was very pleased with it. I hope that LinkedIn enjoys my new aid in authorship in putting my newsletter together. Um, but I see that AI will just continue to extend the skill set, the capability of the individual, those people who will pick it up and use it as a tool, not as a crutch, not as a substitute, but as a way of extending their own capabilities, will find that it can give you a greater ability to organize, to get other additional information that might not be within your reach or knowledge, and to work with it. And in particular, what we talked about yesterday is what I call just-in-time education, which is I need to know one thing. I don't need to know everything. I don't need to know a semester worth of information. And moving away from the I will call it current status of industrial education, where lots of people get big blocks of information in a group, bringing it down to a bespoke, individualized, custom educational process and using AI to achieve that. I just see that so much more can be accomplished. My own capabilities in generating large volume documents, communications, business plans, capital campaign plans. It's just all accelerating. As Charles was explaining, you actually have a choice. You can use this to give yourself more time where you can create intentional breaks between activities so you can think, contemplate, discern what you should be doing next, or to use the tool also to advantage your planning process. Or you can use it just to move the wheel that much faster, which I think will contribute to poorer decision making and leaning too much on tools that are not true sentient entities, they're just tools. So I've seen so many people talk about AI like it's a person or it's a thinking machine when it's not. And that creates a potential for trouble if you lean on it in the wrong fashion.
Yeah, these are fascinating insights. And with that said, love to recognize the audience. Good morning, all. That's Jason Gerardo. I know who it is. Jason will be here tomorrow with Kelly for a great show. So looking forward to it. Beverly, who was our esteemed guest yesterday with Charles, is back to support the show today. Hi, guys. I have a quick few minutes, waves. Charles comes back, and what I love about having Charles on there, he's a switch hitter, where he's also a host and an audience member. So it's nothing like supporting ourselves. Satya Nadella sees AI's potential. AI will make us more human, not less. And I'm sure, especially coming from Microsoft, plans are of little importance, but planning is essential. That's a great quote. We talked about it a little bit earlier from Winston Churchill, one of my favorite people who has really lifted the world's awareness of so many things. Beverly says AI is here to stay. So much information is accessible in all areas. And Charles comes back with writing crystallizes thought and thought produces action. Paul J. Meyer. And actually, I got a chance to meet Paul and was a fascinating gentleman. I believe he lived down in Dallas and actually was involved with a lot of initiatives. I know he was one of the initial investors in Restoration Hardware, but this is a long time ago. And he was part of a group that was all about 24-hour positive personal improvement programming with people like Brian Tracy and on and on and on. But what comes to mind is with all of these elements and opportunities, you need strategy. And that's key, right? You need to know where to use it, how to use it, when to use it, and how to make what you're doing more effective and more efficient. And that's where I believe, mixing high tech with high touch can really make a significant difference going forward. People still are people, and people are not evolving as fast as technology. So, people I think are going to gravitate more to live streaming because it's one of the few things you can possibly trust that is in real time with real people having real spontaneous conversations. Charles comes back with crystallize your goals, make a plan for achieving them, and set yourself a deadline. Then, with supreme confidence, determination, and disregard for obstacles and other people's criticism, carry out your plan, Paul J. Meyer. So, how did you become familiar with Paul, Charles?
Well, actually, I worked for his organization at the very beginning of my career. After my business, when you had that fascination with planning, time management, organizational behavior, I heard about his organization and I worked for one of his consultant distributors in Canada for a couple of years. And I got exposed to the entire range of products that he had offered. I don't really like to call them products. That's almost disrespectful. Programs, and they were extraordinary. They were very, very, very powerful programs. And I was trained up to facilitate several of the programs. And it was just a really fascinating time in my career because I was exposed to so many planning tools. And I had, at one point, he came to Canada and I had a brief opportunity to meet with him. I was able to listen to him in the audience. And I think I had a chance to shake his hand and he knew my name because I was wearing a name tag, which at the time, of course, you forget and you think, oh my gosh, Paul J. Meyer knew my name. Yeah, but that was really, I'm very grateful for that experience. It was a little bit tough because it was predominantly in the beginning, it was a sales job. So I was pounding the pavement but the company really invested in me and they trained me to facilitate the programs pretty quickly. And that had a major payoff for me. But I really had the privilege of being in front of a lot of senior executives and do some amazing programs.
Yeah, you just never know what you don't know, and especially as it relates to people. Some people cross your path and maybe for a moment, but makes a lasting impression, and other people can support you in a continuing way. And that's where I think the magic is how do you relate to people, how do you lead people, and how do people support each other in a collaborative, supportive way. So, Karl, who when you look back, was somebody that you admired, a mentor or someone who really changed your perspective?
I struggle with this question because, unfortunately, I either failed to adopt a good mentor early in my career, which probably accounts for a number of misdeeds on my part. But one of the few people whose writings I got into was Goldratt, who used to teach, he's passed, but the theory of constraints. And it all got into problem solving, that every problem is typically a combination of smaller problems. And if you study the larger problem and select the right smaller problem to fix, it diminishes the size, complexity, and challenge of all the remaining problems that are there. So I often get into analysis dealing with what I call cascades, where you push over a domino and you see it go through this long activity, and good planning will push those dominoes in the right direction, creating multiple benefits, multiple outcomes. So when you get into planning, I view planning as a step right after strategy, where strategy is like Horace Greeley telling me, "Go west, young man," but the plan has to tell me where I'm starting my trip and where I'm ending my trip and all the milestones along that path and the resources required to accomplish those individual milestones. So I want to map it down to a long list of tasks that are well defined with clear metrics and allocation of responsibility to the person who's going to perform that task within my plan. And as I pointed out to some people over the weekend, I can allocate all I want to, but if the person doesn't accept full responsibility for performing the task that's been allocated, then I'm just wishful thinking at that point in time. So there are a lot of tools for implementing the plan after the plan is created. But I love detail. I like what I call paint by number type of plans that leave little or nothing to the imagination without gaps and as few surprises as possible, because those will all show up on their own anyway.
Yeah, this is just a great conversation. I see that Charles pays homage to Paul J. Meyer again with a quote, 90% of all those who fail are not actually defeated, they simply quit. That is so true. And, you know, when I asked a lot of really successful people, they would always qualify perseverance as the key element to success, right? Because if you never quit and you keep trying and keep learning, keep growing, you'll get better with time. And maybe that's all it takes is to get a little bit better to understand you are on the right road or a road that's going to serve you better. And actually, coming back to Paul again, he was instrumental in the group. It was called the People's Network. And he assembled some of the greatest people, Jim Rohn, Brian Tracy, Agmandino, you name it. They were part of it. And it was a 24/7 show that came into everybody's home when satellite dishes were first available. And Prime Star was the one who, it was very inexpensive, 29 bucks a month. You get a dish, you get all your programming and get this channel for free. So you really couldn't miss. And I thank him because my kids were, you know, when that channel came on, I shut off all the other channels. Except I did give them the Animal Planet, the Cooking Channel, and maybe some history because I thought, you know, those are all positives. And the key was if you ever missed school, you had to watch at least 2 shows and write something up. And my daughter, who was about 10 or 11 at the time, ended up with her whole life plan from a show from Connie Podesta, who was another faculty member. And it was just amazing the impact it could have. Well, here's another great comment. Goldrat's theory of constraints builds on the concept that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. In business operations, where each process involves a series of steps, the slowest step controls the pace of the whole flow of the process. I couldn't agree with that more. And the next follow-up is I highly recommend people read The Goal, one of the best business books ever written. The Goal is a management-oriented novel by Eliyahu M. Goldratt, a business consultant known for his theory of constraints. And that's fascinating because early on, and that was one of the things either Paul Meyer said or somebody else, if you want to know who somebody is, ask them what they're reading. And that'll give you a pretty good indication of who you're talking to. If they're reading comic books or they're reading very important pieces of literature. And I guess right now you could say, ask a person what they're watching or viewing on social media, and that'll tell you a lot more about them also. So in your learning curve, Karl, you know, how did you see continuing education being a benefit to what you're doing then and now?
Well, I don't know that I intentionally engaged in continuous learning. It became a skill essential to what I was doing in working with new technologies, technology startup businesses. They each would bring some innovation forward. Sometimes it was unbaked, it was merely a concept where we knew almost nothing other than it was different than what had been done before. In some cases, it was advanced to the point of an actual product or service. But along that path, I not only had to understand the technology to fully appreciate the business opportunity around it and raise funding for it, but you also then had to learn how to communicate it to a potential customer. Is something that I still do every time I work with a new client. I like to get out between the customer and the business and hear what the customer is saying and asking to see how quickly they are able to absorb, adopt that new technology and gain value from it. Because all too often they're looking at it like I do with a number of the software packages I'm trying to get up to speed on now. And I'm like, I really wish somebody created an educational program to help me learn this quicker, because learning it by trial and error is very slow, very painful, and it's an immense investment of my time. But I think that continuous learning is something, again, that when I was younger, it was get a degree, you're done. They basically thought you were fully baked at that time and you didn't need any further education. But as I got my second degree in law and I stepped into actual practice, I realized about 95% of what I needed to know I hadn't learned yet. And that was a rough estimate. It may have been too conservative even then. So you have to go out and learn all these things. Sometimes I'll meet teachers, the real world, in the trenches on the street, to gain that information. And a lot of people will then, I'll just cover this with a topic we've had before, Don, which is you learn more from failure than from success. So I've managed to have a great learning curve as a consequence. And this all allows me now to look at stuff with a perspective that is brought along by a lot of experience. And that makes my ability to help other people better. And it makes hopefully my selection of new projects higher, more profitable, and more successful.
Well, I think that's fundamental to advancing, is doing things better with time. And I've taken the perspective that failure is only feedback, unless you quit again, because then you got to add up the score, and that's what happened. I guess the definition of optimism that I just recently heard is going from one disappointment to another without losing any enthusiasm, right?
Yes.
For what you're doing. And if you look at things as a chapter and not the book on yourself, or your last result is not a defining point for what the future may bring. And you learn more on the way down, you learn on the way up, because it hurts more and it's personal. On the way up, you think you're God's gift to the business world or whatever. On the way down, you can't believe it, especially if you're new to failure or disappointment. And usually it's an indication that someone flew a little too close to the sun, someone pushed the envelope a little more, but you don't know your boundaries until you actually test them. And sometimes you do fall off the cliff. Luckily, you usually land on your feet and you got to climb back in. I think the other key element to planning and life is to have a quality sense of humor, to change frustration with fascination, and always knowing you're only going to be on top for so long, no matter what the situation is, because you will change, the world will change, and with all these dynamic changes, unless you're ahead of the curve, you're going to find yourself falling behind, and there is no sitting tight. There's no safe ground. You can't just let the world stop spinning while you get yourself together. And I think the other key thing is with planning is understanding you don't have to go from one thing to the next thing immediately, right? Someone has, experiences a loss, and they want to jump right back on the horse, even if the horse isn't ready or the horse doesn't relate to them. And it takes time. And I think part of planning is that philosophy of plan, do, review. And a lot of people are falling behind, so they're just busy doing or reacting or responding instead of getting in front of it to really decide, okay, this was good for this. where does this take me to the next step? And getting there before you have to is key to reinvention. Knowing what's on the horizon. And what's interesting in business, I had a lot of experience in retail and e-tail and marketplaces, is in the earlier days you could see things coming up the hill, right? When Home Depot started in Atlanta, moved to Florida, you could just see their march. And if you're in Colorado, you could figure, well, 3-4 years from now, they're going to be here. And what am I going to do in relationship to them? And how do I respond to them? Now things are coming from the blind side. They're overwhelming people. And one last thing I'll say about technology, having the background and experience, I remember when the fax machine came on the scene. And, that was incredible because that was when I guess FedEx had their golden days where if you wanted something, you can get an overnight letter or something and everybody be rushing to put something in the FedEx or the UPS box. And when the fax machine came on, it was like incredible. The joke was, who was the first person who bought a fax machine going to fax to, right? Because they were the first, and it took two people to really experience it. But you can see, I remember when the internet came to be and dial-up was the rule of the day. And you'd have this rotating clock forever, and which was great for people who were at the beginning because everybody was bad, until Amazon got to the point where they were just taking advantage of their strength, their power, and their technology. So, I think looking back can be a really good guidepost for going forward. And some things never change. Some things change every second. So, Charles, what do you think about dynamic change in the world? And it's a world situation, not just a boundary-clad country situation.
Yeah, yeah. There are a couple of things. One of them is, and the point about maintaining optimism. I think people, the really disciplined people, are disciplined about being grateful about disappointment. And there are lots of stories out there about real cutting edge entrepreneurs. We might have even touched on this yesterday when we looked at limitations, and they have no limitations. I heard the team of entrepreneurs who are mining meteorites talk about developing the technology to mine meteorites, and they had banned the word failure from their organization. And they were like, I think it was the person that invented the light bulb, Edison, or electricity. It tried 50,000 times and said every time he failed, he was just 449,999 times closer, or 998 or 97 times closer to success. And it was the same thing with these entrepreneurs. They didn't allow the word failure in their organization. It was all about learning. And whenever there was a disappointment, they were grateful for the disappointment because they saw that as an opportunity to learn, to grow, and just to get closer to mining these extremely rare minerals that they were finding on meteorites. But globally, one of the things that we're seeing happen is that the younger generation has grown up more in a growth mindset type of environment. Every year that goes by, the educational systems are embracing concepts like positive thinking, appreciative inquiry, growth mindset more and more. There's the famous marshmallow tests from the 1960s, which many school systems have embedded into their curriculum because it was all about emotional self-regulation. And if young children can demonstrate and learn about emotional self-regulation at a young age, and i.e. emotional maturity, then when they grow up, they're more successful in the long term. And the marshmallow tests were all about testing kids who resisting them eating a marshmallow. If they waited a couple minutes, they got 2 marshmallows. And after they did all these tests, they tracked the kids for the rest of their life and have discovered that emotional self-regulation is 16% higher success on SATs, higher earning salaries, more success in education, lower failure rates in marriages and in family breakups and things like that. So growing up in this growth mindset, how does that impact planning and goal setting? If you look at the statistics, I don't have them in front of me. I regret that, and I should have pulled them up. The statistics of goal setting for the different generations is really fascinating. And Gen Z have a higher propensity to have written goals. so if they were to listen to Paul J. Meyer now, they have a higher propensity to say, yeah, that sounds right. I got to do that right away. Absolutely it. And to the point where now you're hearing in the goal setting concepts and theory, you're hearing the concepts of goal getting and how goal setting is really based on habits. And if you build in daily habits into your routine and you practice daily habits, they'll grow into accomplishing your goals and getting your goals. So you're seeing this whole new impact on planning and goal setting that's taking place. But still, few people have any next. Most people live, when it comes to a plan, from hand to mouth without a plan. And they're kind of always at the end of their line, which is unhelpful. And one of the things that Brian Tracy said was that every minute you spend in planning saves 10 minutes in execution, which gives you 1,000% return on energy. No doubt about it, planning saves time. And many people feel the need to jump in as if, to a project or a program or a goal right away, as if it's a pool and there's no point in kind of slowly waiting and you just got to jump in and get into action. But that's kind of foolish, because if you don't have a plan, then you don't know what direction you're going in with respect to your project. And planning sets you up for success, and knowing what path you're going to take. So you just replace that return on energy with a return on investment, and you'll get it. So planning is, one of the things I say is that if every individual on the planet, but particularly leaders, if every leader on the planet took 1 hour a day on Saturday morning or Sunday morning and sat down with their favorite beverage, like a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, not necessarily a glass of wine, but that might work as well, but their favorite beverage, and had that book that Karl talks about, and pulled out their book and said, okay, how am I doing? Am I on track with my goals? How are my relationships? Am I treating my family well? Am I treating my friends well? Am I treating my colleagues at work properly? Am I cleaning up my messes? Is there anything I need to fix? Then the world would be in a much different place now compared to where it is. So I have a lot of hope for the next generation and the future of the planet because of the way planning and goal setting is emerging. It's really, really fascinating once you look under the hood to see how things are different. The younger generation also is much more health conscious. In Hong Kong right now, one of the things that's happening is they're writing articles about how the food and beverage industry has collapsed, not collapsed, but gone down, and that restaurants have closed, and they're saying, oh, this is all doom and gloom for Hong Kong. Well, what they're missing in these articles is that the entire planet, as you say, it's a planetary issue, Don. The entire planet is consuming less in that generation. Gen Z is consuming less, and the generation right ahead of them, I guess, Gen X, are also consuming less. So the young adults and the teenagers are consuming less alcohol. They're much more health conscious. They're more conscious about mental well-being, and it'll be interesting to see if they do go out and accomplish their goals with more aggression. I think their number one goal will be the environment.
Yeah, this is fascinating information we're sharing today. And it actually makes me think that maybe the next stage of live streaming is bringing really quality subjects to the forefront with a panel like we have today, and really expanding into other people's train of thought or planning process. You say Brian Tracy, and I believe, I used to see him every 3 months in Dallas, and got conversational enough to shake hands and say hello. And he had a strategy. And here's a guy who started with nothing and never really finished school, was a landscaper. And he found some people who were golfing and looking really like they were living the high life, something he never thought he would ever participate in. And he came up with the conclusion, I'm just going to do everything they do, learn what they do, how they do it, and I'm just going to keep repeating it. And it worked. But what he mentioned is that the first day of the new year, he would write a list of the 10 things he wanted to achieve. And he put it in a drawer for a year, never looked at it again. And he said, I was always consistently hitting 7 of those things all the time. And it was just that act of a little bit of thought, a little bit of putting it on paper, seeing it, understanding it, because the written word is powerful. You know, your thoughts can move you in ways, but once you see it on paper, it becomes far more real. And maybe it's a time to adjust, or maybe it's a time to adjust yourself to it. But there is these opportunities that technology brings. It's all how you're applying what you're doing and believing to it, and then how does that relate and communicate to the audience? And more people are going virtual as opposed to physical. A lot of quality speakers. We had actually Ford on this week on Monday, and he's a great friend. He's one of the 200 living Hall of Fame speakers in the world. And he had a ninth grade education, was orphaned, never knew his parents, and turned his whole life around. And Jim Rohn will tell you the same story if he was around, but when he was around, he said that, or Earl Nightingale. Um, it's usually the people who come from behind that end up never stopping at mediocre or average. They just fly through it to greatness. And I think the other element that's so important is really at a certain point turning off the noise around you. I can't tell you how many people have told me that can't be done. You won't be the one to do it. It's impossible. And if you take their word for it, they become right immediately. But you say to yourself, well, maybe now is the time, right? Or maybe the technology is here, or maybe I'm there and I'm not going to get affected by this. And pushing the envelope when it makes you think more, continues the curiosity, which I think is so valuable to so many people. Because, like Edison, he had a curiosity. It wasn't going to be deterred by anything. Actually, there's a story of his best friend, Henry Ford. And if you've ever been to the Henry Ford Museum or Greenfield Village, actually, it has Thomas Edison's laboratory that they reconstructed from New Jersey and brought it over. And he came up with an idea that he wanted to build an 8-cylinder engine. And all of his engineers and all of his people said, it can't be done. And he said, I don't care about that. Just start doing it. Right. And eventually it got done, just like Roger Bannister with his 4-minute mile. There was scientists and medical people say the human body is not built for a 4-minute mile. But the year he broke the record, like 7 other people broke that record too. Why? Because they knew it could happen and they believed they could make it happen. So I think there's a lot to do with empowering people, motivating people, you know, keeping people in the game where they might have quit without you. And I think that's really one of the definitions of leadership, is having people do what they couldn't or wouldn't do without your benefit. And I think that can go a long way. So, Karl, this has been a fabulous conversation. We still have a few minutes left. How do you relate to what we're talking about today, and what's your vision of the planet's future and the people in it?
I'm intrigued by the fact that Charles has related that the current generation, the earliest, most recent generation, is engaging in more thoughtful planning going forward. I'm kind of curious as to what's driving that change in behavior, whether it's because our generation, we were told pretty much from birth, well, you got to go do this, go do that, go get a degree. And we were, you know, our plan for our career was written out in a fairly heavy script with very little room for deviation. And even in becoming an entrepreneur in an entrepreneur family, I still was pretty much expected that I was going to take over the farm, which was in a declining industry, which didn't make any sense to me, which is why we parted ways early in my career. But I see the world today as being a little bit more chaotic. I think that a lot of current generation, the earliest generation, thinks we've kicked the can down the road too often on the environment and other critical issues regarding taking care of people and communities and other topics. And I appreciate the fact that they are now, in my mind, being more thoughtful. They are engaging in planning their own selves, their own careers, their own planet. And to me, that gives me greater optimism. I guess I'm going to jump from one disappointment to another here without losing enthusiasm. But if we think collectively, if we work collectively with the respect and appreciation for everybody else who's on the planet, who's in our community, who's on our team, better things will happen. It's just natural consequence of working together to gain greater benefit. And so planning is a tool for helping that happen. And the more people that get engaged in the planning process, I think the better results we're going to see.
Yeah, that is so right on. Charles repeats the quote from Brian Tracy on the 10 minutes of execution, and then comes back with research conducted by Strava using over 800 million user logged activities in 2019 predicts the day most people are likely to give up on their New Year's resolution is January 19th. Strava calls it Quitter's Day. 17 January for 2024, so I guess it's going down. But what does give me hope is seeing my own generations, my kids, how they're working and dealing with life differently than I was at their point. And they've all embraced multiple streams of income, have diversified themselves. I mean, my daughter's 40, my son's 37. And at this point, they could almost retire because of the thriftiness and the ability to have more things going on. And both of them pretty much work for themselves. But what's interesting, my granddaughter, who's 14, she has no interest. When you say, hey, are you excited about getting a car or driving? Not really. And today with Uber and Lyft, it's like, and the cost of a car. And what I've learned is if you don't need a lot, you can do a lot to what you like to do. So if you have a lower overhead, if you're able to sacrifice a little, invest a little, actually my grandkids now have nice investment funds, and they've actually doubled their value. My daughter and son-in-law created this, and every month they would say, well, what do you like? What would you like to invest this month in? And typically it would be a movie studio that might have been Marvel, or an app that they like. And, maybe there's something to that. The closer to the ground, the closer to the action is where you can possibly see things. And I think it's bridging those generations. And where we used to be, let's say, teachers or wise people, or have grandparents who would instill things in us, a lot of times you can learn a lot more from your kids and your grandkids than you think, because they're exposed to things in a way that you never were. I mean, they started out with tablets and iPhones and everything else. They didn't have to unlearn a lot of things. So, we're talking about planning, but, planning affects everything we do, or could affect everything we do if we spend the right amount of time and get the background and foundation that Charles allowed us to see different books and different insights today. So last words for both of you. I'll start with Charles and end with Karl.
Yeah, sure. So Karl, in answer to your question about what's causing that, I think Don's touched on it. A lot of it is social media. I think information and the internet and social media makes information much more readily accessible. There's still a lot of issues out there. There are the younger generation is a very lonely generation, and I think that's an issue that is going to come home to roost at some point. But as much as we hear lots of negative things about social media, there are a lot of positive messages that are out there on social media. And it's encouraging to see some of that out there. I think we also have a lot of issues with misinformation at the same time. And I also think I've been in education now for coming up to 14 years. So I've seen the evolution of the curriculums. I've seen how our organization had programs around emotional regulation that we started embedding into the curriculum, and through different programs. And I've also been involved in the Neuro Leadership Institute, which has done a lot of work and study around this area. I know that many of the leading schools, primary, secondary schools in the US have done similar things, embedding emotional regulation tools into the curriculum. And I think that that kind of growth mindset shift and the encouragement shift, the empowerment shift in education is making a difference. Not that there aren't still problems to solve in education. I think that there are, and there's funding issues and all of that. We won't get into that now. That's a whole other discussion for another day. But I did find those statistics around goal setting. And of people who set New Year's resolutions, people in their 50s are 14% likely to keep their resolutions for the year. So people in their 50s, 14% likely to 14% of people in their 50s are likely to keep their resolutions for the entire year. So any guesses what that is for people in their 20s? More than double. 39% of people in their 20s are more likely to keep their resolutions for the entire year and keep their and meet their goals for the entire year. So that's a pretty interesting statistic about some things happening in the younger generation, that they're going out there and setting goals at the beginning of the year and more likely to achieve them. But I think that one of my closing thoughts on planning would be that good fortune is what happens when opportunity meets with planning. And Thomas Edison said that. So I encourage everybody to take the time at least once a week, sit down and plan. And as Brian Tracy promises, you'll reap the benefits from that investment.
That's a great takeaway. A lot of takeaways. Karl?
I guess I'm going to follow that up with the adage that you shouldn't worry about things that you cannot control. And through good planning, you can increase the number of things you can control, so you can increase the things you can worry about. So I'll just leave it with that.
Well, you're leaving it in a great place, a place that's even better than the place we started at, which is confirmation of the interchange of knowledge and insight to each other that then projects out there in the audience, and just as importantly, future audiences. And when we ever get to the point where we're really starting to repurpose these shows, there's definitely many 60-second segments that would be very valuable in lending more information going forward. So with that, I want to thank the quality audience today and tomorrow who will watch this. Especially thank Charles and Karl. I never get enough of either one of them, and that's one of the motivating factors for doing this. I look forward to Charles coming into Canada possibly in November and doing some more shows, but I have to applaud how fresh and lively Charles is at midnight while we're sitting here at 9 in the morning. So that does speak volumes. So with that said, to everybody, come back tomorrow. We'll have Kelly and Jason